I have 3 tools from Amazon to show you today. 3 tools that you can get for a pretty good price. But not only that, even though they're good value, if you think they're too expensive, I'm going to show you a much cheaper option. So let's start straight away with tool number 1. No matter what you're making in your workshop, every woodworker needs 2 fail-safes. One is a square that you can trust to be dead nuts 90. And the other is a reference edge that you can guarantee is flat and straight. And it doesn't matter which type of square you go for. You just need one to check that what you're building is actually square, to check that your tools are dialed in, and to check that your cuts themselves are square. But the square is not tool number 1. I'm here to talk about the straight edge. And just like a square, you need your straight edge to help you dial in your tools. Check that the beds and the tabletops are actually flat. To quickly see if one of your hand planes, be it new or old, needs a bit of extra lapping. They've got so many uses. But what I use it for most is actually checking that the cuts that I rip or the boards that I joint are actually square and straight. You just need something close to hand that you can place against whatever it is that you're testing. And to make it easier, just shine a light from the back to see if there's any gaps. Really simple. But what can you actually use for this? For years, I've used this ruler, I guess you'd call it. And I've never had a clue if it is actually truly straight and flat. I have also been known to use this. I don't know if that's flat. And more often than not, I use the edge of my longest plane. And I've got no idea if that's even flat. For years, I've honestly assumed that they're all flat. But if they aren't, then everything I test won't be either. And that is a problem. So I've bought 2 things that I'm going to show you as tool 1. One is this pricey Technician straight edge for £48. And the other is a cheap Machinist straight edge for £35. Let's check them out and see the differences. But first, a few similarities. They are both 610mm long. They're both chunky enough to stand on their own. The pricier straight edge is about twice the weight because it's made from carbon steel, whereas the less expensive one is made from aluminium. So with that, we have to say the cheaper one is far more likely to get marked and nicked with any knives should you use it as a cutting edge. The more expensive one is simple, no frills. In fact, the third feature they talked about was the hole for hanging it, with the other 2 being the quality of the metal and the rubber to protect the edge. We'll come on to the edge in a second. The cheaper one has measurements both in metric and imperial, though whether we can rely on them, we'll have to look at that in a second. As honestly, they haven't been etched on with a laser, they've just been stuck on as a tape. The aluminium is a really nice tactile shape due to its contours, makes it very easy to grip. But as I said before, the protective cover on the more expensive one, which has none of the frills, is a big clue to a telling difference that explains, well, the 50% extra on the price. You see, the pricier one has a machined edge, whereas the cheaper aluminium one doesn't. But are they both straight? Or as straight as each other? I think we need to test that. I've just taken the 2 straight edges on each piece, laid them on top of each other, and I'm shining a light from the back while recording on a video the front. I've turned the lights right down so there's no missing the results. And this may feel like a really crude test, but you can see that some light sneaks under the bottom of the rubber, but nothing, absolutely nothing, coming through between the 2 straight edges. Now you can say that test doesn't seem all that accurate because you're testing one against the other. What if they're both off? But they'd have to actually be both off in the same places, counteracting each other to actually fill the gap left by the other. I genuinely don't think that's the case. That is staggering. What if we just flip them over and try it the other way? That way, if they were counteracting each other, well, they can't be now. And I've got the light right up against the back. So if anything was going to be seen coming through, it would happen. Now you have to bear in mind that I selected these 2 straight edges particularly because any other alternative was at least £100 if not higher. And I know you might want to get something longer, but if you want to see if there's a good use for a straight edge in what you're doing, I think these are a really good starting point. Plus, if you don't need the longer one, this is much more comfortable to use on a smaller job. Maybe eventually you get a long and a small one. A workshop is a much happier place when you've got a square you can trust and a straight edge you can trust. But I did promise you an even cheaper option. So here it is. This is simple T-track, and it is significantly cheaper than getting any of these. But is it as straight? Yes. Yes, it is. So if you really don't want to spend all that money, start with something like this. See if it's useful. If it's useful, then maybe you upgrade. Now, is anybody else curious if what I was actually using before was even straight? Uh-oh. But it does lead me to an interesting point here. 1, don't expect rougher tools like this, more construction-based tools. Don't expect them to be absolutely dialed in. You saw there probably a millimetre gap where the light was coming through. If you're working on a construction site, or doing what I use this for, which is using it with a circular saw, 1 millimetre, that's fine. And if you do find that you're using a straight edge, check it for glue. I don't believe for 1 second that this is going to be straight, because this particular hand plane has been welded back together. However, it is my favourite. Haha! Absolutely dead. Oh, not quite. You have to take my word for this. That is, that's no more than a millimetre of gap. That's seriously impressive to the welder. And finally, my go-to, a tiny, tiny bit coming through. And as one opinion that I'll leave you with now, if you're cutting wood and testing within certain parameters and you've got something like this, that's also fine, because wood's wood, wood moves, wood's not a perfect science. I'd be happy with that. But having one of these around to dial your tools in gives you the best chance of the best cut every time. Now let's have a look at tool 2. Cutting circles can be a pain, especially if you don't have a CNC or a laser cutter. You can make a jig for a bandsaw or in a pinch a table saw, but all those tools alone cost upward of £300, whereas the one I'm going to show you today is around 15. But, and this is a caveat I guess, you're going to need a trim router. But even factoring in the cost of a trim router, you're still cheaper than buying table saw, bandsaw, CNC or a laser cutter. You see this? This is a router circle jig. And although this is good, I'm going to show you something at the end that'll do the same job that's practically free. And we'll have a little bit of a laugh along the way, because this is being advertised as a 4-in-1 tool. And I can really only see 2 uses, maybe 3. So we'll look into that as well. But before we get into testing the tool, I want to thank this week's sponsor, Huel. You see, it's normally this time, mid-morning, that I have to head out of the workshop, go back to the house in search of a snack. And I confess, I'm a little bit of a sucker for a biscuit. But today I started the day with Huel Black Edition powder, so I can go straight back into my workshop, carry on filming right the way through till lunch without that snack. You see, it only takes 30 seconds to prepare, and the costs start at $2.65 a serving. Just add 2 level scoops of Huel to 500 millilitres of cold water and shake for 10 seconds. I can even drink it on the way to the workshop thanks to this handy bottle. Try doing that with a bowl of cereal. The Huel Black Edition powder contains all the nutrients the human body needs, including the right amount of protein, essential fats, carbohydrates, fibre, vitamin and minerals as part of a healthy, balanced diet. And if you're looking for a healthy, refreshing drink on the go, give these Huel Daily Greens ready to drinks a go. No powder, no mess, and they taste great too. I can't drink this one though because it's my wife's favourite flavour. So if you want to give Huel a go for yourself, there's a QR code on the screen right now. And I've left a link in the description, pinned in the comments too, for you to click. Use the code SM15 and you'll get 15% off your first order of $75 or more. And thank you to Huel for sponsoring this video. Now we can test that second tool. So here's how this works. You get a long length, you get a cross piece, and then you get the base plate. Now the base plate is supposed to fit any router because it's got the 4 slots, so it gives you a bit of play for the screws. Now, on my Makita here, which is a pretty popular router, trying it on all 4 sides, the most I can get in is 3 screws. However, I'm happy with that, that's pretty tight. But if you want one that goes on better than that, you might have to stick around till the end when I show you the free one, because that one you can customize to any router you want. And you can even use it with a plunge base, which I'm beginning to think might be a better option here. Anyway, once you've got the base plate installed, you can then take the longer rod and you simply screw it into place. Now the longer length is where you're going to find all of your numbers. This shows you the radius of the circle that you're going to cut. And you can move the little gauge here with the hole in the middle to wherever you want. Say you want 10 centimetres, you just lock it off with the hole, bang on, 10 centimetres. Next job, you're going to put a nail through the hole, which will then pivot the whole router jig and it'll cut you a circle. Note, you'll want to have a straight bit in the router, and you want to lower the bit a small amount at a time so you take in lots of shallow passes to get the best results. And like with any tool, there are multiple ways you can actually go about cutting your circle. Option 1, have a spoil board underneath what you're cutting, take multiple shallow passes until your last pass takes you straight through the bottom. Option 2, you route out to around about 3/4 of the depth of the circle you want, then you take your jigsaw and you cut within the trough of the router cut and you remove the circle. Then, whether you're keeping the outside or the inside, you take it to a router table, or if you feel comfortable with your handheld router and you're using a flush trim bit, you finish the job. But apparently, the jig doesn't stop there, because they call it this 4-in-1 jig, and I want to test out what they really mean by that. You see, they define job 1 as the circle cutter, as we know. Job number 2 involves this cross brace, and I think this is a legitimate job too. You attach the cross piece using the insert and the grooves on the cross piece to hold it in place, sliding the insert into the cross piece and then attaching it through. The grooves on the cross piece give it a nice positive stop. And then the idea is, if you want to make a groove parallel to one edge of a board, you hold the cross piece against the board, turn on the router and make your groove. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think about that in a second. But let's first of all laugh at jobs 3 and 4. Job 3 is they say that you can use this jig to measure right angles. So in theory, they want you to remove this section and in effect, you've got yourself a square. I'm skeptical to say the least. But job 4 is the laughable one. This is called placing and punching, which I can only imagine means you have to use the measurements to move the gauge that you would put the nail through to pivot the whole machine. And then once it's in the right place, you can use it to punch stuff. I don't know how that's better than using a ruler and a punch, especially as the measurements on this are to the router, not to the end of the ruler. So I'm not even going to test job 4. Job 4 is silly. You don't need to add a 4th job on this. This is a 3-in-1 jig max. So let's test out job 3, because even then I'm a little bit skeptical, and I'll show you why. This cross piece, I said it's got the positive stops from the grooves. Putting pressure one way, it's locked. Putting pressure the other, you get a small amount of movement. You can hear that clicking as it moves from the one positive stop to the other. I'm going to lock it off on one, and then we're just going to give it a test. Then I'm going to take an edge that I know to be square, and I tell you what, one way, that is absolutely square. But if I click it that extra millimetre and tighten it back up again, well, you can see that there's a gap now at the bottom. Job 3 isn't really a job for it. As for job 2, the grooving guide, I like it. My only issue is here. I personally would like to have a little bit more reference edge, because you have to keep the cross piece snug with the side of the board the whole time. But for £15, I'll give it job 2. And you can see they've actually given a little bit of thought to this, because the edges of the guide that runs along the wood have actually been rounded off, meaning that there's less chance that the leading corner can actually dig into the side and pivot the piece away, ruining your job. I don't hate that. And as an aside for that job alone, the play in the cross piece, once it's tightened up snug, I don't think that's going to cause you any issues. What might, if you rely on it, is the fact the numerical guide can't possibly be trusted to be accurate, because that is technically apparently measured to the centre of your router and the centre of the bit you're using. My router, the way this sits on, the pin's not in the middle. And if you were to use one of the conical centering pins to get that central, well, the screws aren't going to match up. But even if you did, well, the markings are only as accurate as whichever one router bit they measured it from in the first place. Because if you go in with a 1/4 inch bit or a 1/2 inch bit, well, that's going to be different each time. And it doesn't say anywhere which bit they've used to measure that. So I would not personally rely on the measurements here. I would do your own measurements. Then you won't suffer any issues down the line with things being slightly off. So overall, if you're on a budget, I genuinely think this is a really handy tool to have in a drawer somewhere for when you need to cut your circles. And you can get fairly decent trim routers for £40, £50 that will go with it really nicely. But what if you want to make a circle and you don't want to actually leave any mark at all? Well, there's a solution to that too. Get a thin piece of wood, stick it down with double-sided tape, place the guide above and put the pin only as deep as the piece of wood that you've just stuck on. The only thing you do need to make sure you do is that you stick a piece of wood underneath the plate that is exactly the same dimensions as the piece that you've put on top of the centre of the circle. That way, everything stays level and you don't have that slight tilt when you're moving the router around. That way, you can have a circle without the hole in the middle of the circle. And now the free alternative. All it is a bit of 5mm ply, cut to the right length, then mark your screw placements with the router plate you got with your router. Bonus points if you've got one of these self-centering drill bits. Give these a little bit of a countersink so your screws don't mar the work, and then drill holes at whatever points you want the pin. But you will notice that halfway through I swapped out the normal base for my plunge base. As there are different screw locations on each one of the plates, I've made it compatible for both. But after testing it, the plunge base is actually far better as you can easily control the depth that you're going to plunge to. Again, bonus points if you use the same router bit each time and you measure from the edge of that router bit along your piece and put your holes in and set measurements. This jig, in my opinion, is a great starter for cutting circles. And now let's have a look at tool number 3, the cheapest of the bunch. So tool 3 is a quick one, and for anybody who has limited tools or who just needs a certain tool in a pinch. My first power tool when I started out was this exact circular saw. And it was great for cutting construction timber with a speed square. Tie it in with one of these inexpensive crosscut stations and now you've got in effect a miter saw for thinner stock. Use a straight guide and it's good for cutting sheet goods. But where I always struggled was doing thinner rips on thinner stock. Thinner than the guide that comes with it allows you to do. Ripping a piece of wood that's actually too thin for my homemade guide to sit on. Or even a piece of wood that's thinner than the base plate of the saw itself, so you can't even clamp a guide to it. So less an issue for sheet goods, but more an issue for things like 2x4. And this is where this cheap tool comes in. But it also comes with a word of warning that I'm going to get to shortly. Now the way this works is it clips onto the underside of the base of your circular saw with the cam lever clamp at the back and then the turn screw clamp at the front. You level it to make sure that it's parallel with the blade of the saw and then away you go. You can now rip wood down with your circular saw to as narrow as you want. And I would actually potentially use this on sheet goods because it's quicker than moving a guide and it's potentially easier. It is really that simple and it only costs £12. Like all the tools, I'll pop a link to it down in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. Now the word of warning, there is a cheaper option that you'll see. I would avoid these at all costs. I knew when I bought this that it was going to be too small for my saw, but I wanted to show it to you anyway and see whether it was any good. The issue with this one is it locks down just fine. You just twist the screw at the back and it moves the plate forward until it clamps down on the saw. However, whereas the other guide actually can lift up at the back slightly to accommodate the size of your base plate, this is to fixed heights, so it's going to be very difficult to get it very tight. But that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is when you want to loosen it, you unscrew this, and it even says in the description that this plate should move back with it, but it doesn't because of the thread of the screw that holds it on. All it does is unscrew itself. So to take this off your saw, you have to fully unscrew this off the screw on the inside and then push this back manually. So avoid this one, spend a little bit extra on this one, or do what I'm about to show you now and make it for free. All you need if you're going to make this for free is a T-track, some fixtures and a little bit of scrap wood. Though you could simply use double-sided tape and a straight batten, depending on how fancy you're feeling. Just ensure that whatever you use, be it a jig, a batten with tape, anything, make sure that it is absolutely rock solid on the base of your saw before you start cutting. With any one of these jigs, it takes a little bit of fine tuning to ensure that it is in the right place for your cut and that it is parallel with the blade. But this isn't the type of tool that you're going to use every day. This is the type of tool that there's a certain job that's bugging you and you just can't get it done any other way. Maybe you haven't sprung out for a table saw yet or you're not confident enough to use it. But I will say this for the entire video. If you buy or make your own jigs and tools, please use as much care as you possibly can because in the case of your own tools, they haven't been through the rigorous safety standards that most companies will go through. And also, a lot of the tools that you're going to buy off Amazon may not have ever had that done either. As with anything, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. So that was 3 tools. 3 tools from Amazon. And as always, there's links down in the description if you want to check them out for yourself. And I've just uploaded an after show for this video onto Patreon. So that's going to have all the behind the scenes chat and some insights into the next video. And I just want to say a heartfelt thanks to everyone who's already over there. If you pop over or you click on one of these videos, I'll see you over there. Thanks a lot for watching.